Okay, so one of the key things for asymmetric information is not only being able to explain what it is and how it causes inefficiency, but the various ways the government can intervene to try and reduce the problems associated with asymmetric information. And look, don't feel that you need to know every single one of these. Just be aware of some examples that you can use as concrete examples of government intervention to try and reduce asymmetric information. So one example is government regulation in consumer law. So basically in Australia, it's illegal for you to make statements that either mislead or deliberately deceive customers. So if basically you can get a fine of up to $250,000, and often more if it's a big business, if you're intentionally meaning to mislead or deceive your customers. So for example, if a business was to, in the jewelry industry, if they found that you advertised something as 10 karat gold and it wasn't, then you could be up for a massive fine. So some examples of things that businesses need to provide is unfair contract terms. So if you basically sign a contract that's unfair and has misled consumers into believing that they had certain rights and then they didn't, then that can be seen as illegal. Consumers have certain rights in terms of warranties. So if you purchase a certain product, often that needs to be come with a warranty, that if anything is defective within the first 3 months, you get your money back. They need to be up to a certain safety standard. So if they don't meet those safety standards, you're entitled to a refund. There's also rules for door-to-door selling, so you can't sell to certain people. So a good example of that is with old people that perhaps aren't of sound mind. It can be illegal for you to try and convince them into getting new electricity and things like that. So one of the first things you learn if you're doing door-to-door sales is that you've got to be mindful that the person you're talking to is capable of making decisions or financial decisions. If there is a major problem with the product you're selling, the consumer also has the right for a replacement or a refund. So that is always the case. Therefore, you're protected against buying really dodgy products. The consumer can also choose to receive compensation. So if what happens if you pay for a product above what it's worth, you can decide instead of taking the product back, you can decide that you just want to have compensation for the difference between what you thought you were buying and the value of the actual product. So you can choose to have a refund and give the thing back, or you can just get compensated for the amount that you've kind of been ripped off, or the amount that the product is below their standard. So the idea of this is to protect people from buying faulty goods and therefore lead to a more efficient allocation of resources. So it's all about laws against misleading and deceptive conduct. Most of this is part of the consumer law, which was passed in 2010 with the new Consumer Act. Other things, and this is probably a more straightforward one that you can use, is this idea of labelling laws. So packaged processed food has to have the labelling laws on the back, listing all the key ingredients in descending order, so what they use the most and then to the least. They also have to have nutritional information, so we need to list the amount of fat, carbohydrates, sodium and protein. And I'm sure you've seen this on a lot of the stuff that you eat. Not all companies want to provide this stuff, but it's law for them for packaged processed food that they have those nutritional information. And the idea of that is to obviously to give people more information about what they're buying. It's also law to help protect those that have allergies so that they know what's in the food, because obviously it's not efficient for people to be getting sick with allergies and so on and so forth. It's also, some foods actually have to show their key ingredients. So for example, something like almond milk, they have to actually state that it's only 2% almonds, so that they're not misleading people into thinking that it's got a higher concentration of a certain product than it actually does. So labelling laws is a good example of government intervention to reduce asymmetric information. Laws in the health insurance market, this is more about allocative efficiency, probably not one you're going to quote, but those that earn over more than $90,000 actually pay an extra tax if they don't have private health insurance. So they can pay an extra tax of between 1 and 1.5% if they don't have private health insurance. Once you turn 30 years of age, you also have to pay an extra 2% if you don't have health insurance as well. So what can happen is if you decide to get health insurance when you turn 40, you actually have to pay an extra 20% when you buy health insurance for the 10 years that you didn't have it. So it's an incentive to get people to buy health insurance, and therefore it sort of stops people that don't need to be relying on public healthcare, which helps to reduce waiting lists and encourages people to seek out treatment. So that's an example of how the government's trying to achieve more allocative efficiency. Another example that's more related to asymmetric information is that in a lot of service professions, like doctors, lawyers and teachers, you have to be certified and you have to pay a yearly fee to make sure that there's people not sort of part of the profession that aren't that aren't qualified. So I have to be registered by the VIT, which is the Victorian Institute of Teachers, where I pay $120 every year so that people can't go into schools and pretend they're teachers and essentially you're not getting the service you deserve because they're not qualified at what they do. So it prevents fraud, it prevents people from misleading people into certain services. So that's another example, is that the people have to be certified and pay a yearly fee to prevent asymmetric information. Other examples, advertising is a really important one. Okay, government advertising is a big way to try and present asymmetric information. So if a product has external benefits, so that may be like healthy foods or something like that, the idea is to provide more information to the consumers that that product is good for you, that it's going to provide benefits to you, and if something is a demerit good that's going to likely to cause problems for society, it's about giving you information about the negatives of that good. So often we have a lack of information with certain goods, so advertising campaigns are really important to highlight the benefits associated with products, so we know more about the products that we're buying. And then negative campaigns can tell you about some of the negative things, or the dangers of smoking and drinking, etc., or all the bad things that are in food, so you have more information about the product that you're purchasing. Subsidies are another example. The government can subsidise firms who provide meaningful information to consumers, or they can give grants to those who make documentaries. So the idea is that it's basically the government's giving assistance for firms to provide more information to customers, so they're less likely to make inefficient choices. Documentaries is pretty rare, but sometimes the government will subsidise documentaries if they feel that they're preventing people from buying demerit goods. So I don't know if the government subsidised that Super Size Me, the movie about McDonald's, but that could be an example of them subsidising something to try and reduce demerit goods. Other things is there's laws relating to warranties and defective products. So all goods have to be up to a certain standard, and people are entitled to a refund if they purchase goods. So the Victorian government is introducing lemon laws, which basically means car manufacturers have to replace anything that's defective about their products. All cars come with a rule that they need to be acceptable quality and fit for purpose. So basically you're able to drive them. There's also contract laws. So this is a really good one for talking about the principal and agent problem. The government tried to get rid of unfair dismissal laws back in 2006. And that way, basically, they made it easy for people to sack people that were on contracts, and the idea of that was prevent them from slacking off and not working as efficiently, so that they were doing things that the employer couldn't observe and trying to reduce asymmetric information. There's also exclusions clauses for insurance companies, so that if you are drink driving or speeding, you often don't get access to your insurance to try and prevent extreme examples of moral hazards. Okay, so this is just straight from the ACCC. Part of Australian consumer law is that if you do anything that's misleading or deceptive, you can receive a large fine. It actually doesn't make any difference whether you are trying to be deceptive. If the statements are tricking people into thinking that it's of a certain standard, then you can still be fined. Thank you.